Hey everyone, I am going to be talking about The Minister's Black Veil, written by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and I hope you guys enjoy my drawings. This story takes place in a seemingly peaceful community called Milford. It is a peaceful village because of the bright faces and merry parents. They are also a religious community because they take pride in their Sunday clothes. This shows of how they take pride in their appearance and their looks. However, the gloom fills the air when Minister Hooper walks into the church. The townspeople become shocked and they all gravitate their attention to the veil. The minister was named Mr. Hooper and people instantly judged him and hated his veil. They did not like it because it was different, and they got even more furious because he never wanted to take it off. This is when he began to isolate himself from the townspeople, and they were very vocal about their disapproval. Mr. Hooper had a reputation of being a good but slightly dull preacher. However, the veil given him more strength to deliver more powerful preachings. His preachings would evolve into a more gloomy tone because he would talk about the commitment of the secret sin, and no one could ever hide his or her inner demons from God. His preaching left the townspeople speechless because it was the reality of the existence of evil. After the ceremony, when Mr. Hooper was blessing the children, people still divided themselves into groups to judge him, and even a physician told his wife that he looked like a ghost, and then she agreed. This showed of how morally incorrect they were. Bell had rung for a young woman's funeral, and then Mr. Hooper was wearing his black veil. Shockingly, Mr. Hooper lowered himself into the coffin to give his prayers for the young girl, and he slightly unveils himself to her. He becomes frightened from unveiling himself to the young girl's corpse, but the people question his fear, and he delivers a heartfelt preaching with the utmost sorrow, and his heart was filled with grief in every single word he spoke. Despite his efforts of good preaching, people still feared him because the townspeople believed that it was the meeting between the living and the dead. The altercation spikes more rumors about Mr. Hooper's dark side because an older woman claimed that the young girl's corpse was shaken after seeing his face. When Mr. Hooper looks back after the funeral, some people believe he was walking out of the funeral with the young woman's spirit. After the funeral, Mr. Hooper had to preach in a wedding ceremony for a happy couple in the Milford village. However, his black veil changed the atmosphere from happiness into darkness because it caused the bride to turn as pale as the young girl's corpse from the funeral earlier. She was mortified by the black veil color. Mr. Hooper tries to uplift everyone's spirit during the ceremony as he raises his hand that holds the glass of wine. Sadly, when Mr. Hooper stares into his reflection, his lips turned pale. Then he stormed out of the church filled with sorrow. This creates a scandal where Mr. Hooper received a visit from the council of churches to discuss his issues, but they did not know how to confront him or question him about the black veil. Everyone was confused because Mr. Hooper never reveals his reasoning for wearing the black veil. No one has the courage to confront him because they are all too afraid of him. To-be wife named Elizabeth was the only one that had the courage to confront the minister. Sadly, Mr. Hooper refused to reveal himself to his beloved Elizabeth. She begged and she pleaded, but he was too prideful. He refused her. This creates a conflict in their relationship because the veil comes in between their love. She asked Mr. Hooper to explain his reasoning, but to please unveil himself first because she does not want him to lose his job over the ridiculous rumors and scandals. The veil is Mr. Hooper's shield and makes it a higher priority because he will only remove it when they reunite in heaven. But she does not understand, and then she ends up leaving him. He becomes the figure of evil. The children would run away from him, and he developed a severe hatred toward his veil because he could no longer stand the sight of his own reflection. Mr. Hooper gave up his walks to the graveyard because he becomes the walking nightmare to the community, and he becomes depressed from having that dark reputation. Sadly, the wind will not even blow in his direction to fulfill his wishes. However, the black veil did attract the dying sinner and the councilman who supported Mr. Hooper's beliefs. His darkness made him famous in New England, and he was finally able to get the position as Father Hooper. His ceremonies were filled with dark sinners and some people who viewed the black veil as a lesson in disguise because it showed children that the consequences of committing a sin. The veil started a powerful revelation in New England that made Mr. Hooper successful and famous. Time flew by. Mr. Hooper grew older and very ill. When he laid upon his deathbed with no friends or family surrounding him, only Reverend Clark and Elizabeth. Reverend Clark wanted Mr. Hooper to lift his veil, but Mr. Hooper still refused after all these years. Reverend Clark confronted him and asked why he has worn the veil for so many years. Mr. Hooper explains that the people should fear their own black veil and not his. He believed that the townspeople were the true evil ones because they chose to mask their secret sin rather than accepting them. Mr. Hooper's dying wish was to be buried with his veil because he never wanted to remove it on earth. He only wanted to be unveiled in the afterlife. Then he died with a sad smile. Reverend Clark obeyed his wish and buried him deep into the ground as he turned to dust beneath the veil. Hey everyone, I am going to be doing an analysis on the minister's black veil. The black cloth is a symbol of darkness and despair. However, the veil is supposed to be a representation of innocence, like when the father lifts up the veil of the bride in the wedding ceremony. Mr. Hooper never gives his reasoning for wearing his infamous black veil, but he implies in the story that we all live in secret sin. His black veil could be a representation of a shield to protect himself in the secret sin community that surrounds him because the veil covers his eyes. Or it could be a reflection toward all of the townspeople, the Puritans, that attempt to act holy when in reality they are living in a world of secret sin as well, but refuse to admit it. His veil is a symbol of the evil that exists in the world and how the townspeople, the Puritans, need to accept it rather than fear it. This is Hawthorne's critique against the religion the Puritans. Nathaniel Hawthorne discusses a lot about human nature in many of his stories. This takes place in the 1800s in a small village called Milford. The village is filled with many Puritans in a merrily setting. In the story, when they take dignity in their Sunday clothes, creates the conflict between the townspeople and Mr. Hooper because this shows that they care a lot about appearance and looks. Appearance has a significant meaning to the Puritans. The bright faces transition into fury as soon as they see Mr. Hooper's black veil. Immediately, the people judge and ridicule him because they question the mystery behind his motives for wearing the black veil all the time. The Puritans believe he is evil, mad, insane, depressed, or has committed an evil crime. I believe this is a comparison to the setting of the Salem witch trials because the Puritans used to accuse innocent people to be witches just for wearing all black during the 1600s. This is also Hawthorne's critique of Puritans. Edgar Allan Poe was one of the biggest critics toward the story because he did not like of how Hawthorne never revealed Mr. Hooper's reasoning for wearing the black veil. He also believed that Mr. Hooper wore the veil because of the previous love story between Mr. Hooper and the young girl's corpse. Since he was frightened to unveil himself to her, he preached one of his saddest accents in the congregation, and it was believed by the townspeople that they walked out of the funeral together hand in hand when Mr. Hooper looks back. I don't believe there was a love connection because I believe Mr. Hooper was just really strong in his beliefs and wanted to illustrate the meaning behind secret sin through the black veil. When Mr. Hooper preached in the wedding ceremony, the bride is compared to the young girl's corpse from earlier because the black veil frightened her. When Mr. Hooper stares into his own reflection with horror, he storms out of the wedding. He spilt the ceremonial wine. This showed that he is afraid to admit he himself is a sinner as well. This scene showed that he is afraid to admit that he is a sinner. For the earth too had on her black veil. This quote shows that no one can escape the acts of evil, not even Mr. Hooper, because it was a part of human nature. Evil has become a part of the duality with goodness in everyone. Humanity is corrupted because of the sinner that walks among the entire earth everywhere. Mr. Hooper's veil started an altercation with himself and Elizabeth. She wanted to know his reasoning and to unveil himself to her, but he refused. Mr. Hooper explained, "When all of us shall cast aside our veils, take it not amiss, beloved friend, if I wear this piece of crape till then." He also says that it would not be for eternity. This shows that Mr. Hooper would never want to reveal his face until the afterlife, because I feel that it is his outlook of a true pure community. His heaven is the vision of paradise. They could also live more peacefully with no more secret sin to surround them in heaven. When Mr. Hooper smiles underneath the veil after Elizabeth leaves him, this is a representation of his ego, because no one ever understood his ideology toward evil, and how the irony of an article of clothing destroying his bond with true love.